their jail. From there, you can be fined, kicked out. That photo gives me the creeps. Moving on at number 8, we have Mr. One Way. Mr. One Way is the name given to the ghost that haunts the Space Mountain ride at Disneyland, California. Mr. One Way is apparently this tall, lumberjack-looking ghost with red hair and a red face. One legend states that this ghost will hang out in the queue for Space Mountain and just stand there silently. Whereas another version says that he actually will get on the ride only with a single rider, but the ghost of Thomas can still be seen to this day. On a number of occasions, they have seen his ghostly apparition.
Let's pause it. Head to bed. Wake up in the morning. Tomorrow is going to be my 5th day here of Hogwarts. As your 2nd year. Seven in the morning. Like school. Today's my 5th day here as a year 2. Let's smoke some weed. What's YouTube out here?
Running along the tracks. Dude, why are there so many ghosts at Disney? Like seriously, it's the last place.
Let's have a joint for the day.
In our 3rd spot today, we have the ladies. The ladies is the name given to a group of white-haired ladies that haunt the grounds of Disney. We don't know who they are or why they haunt Disney, but they do. They say that when these ladies appear, a sense of dread can be felt by whoever sees them. So far, they haven't done anything sinister, but we don't know what they want with the park. Also, they show up periodically. They may be there for one day and then not show themselves until several years later. Maybe they're just a friendly group of old ladies that love Disney and still want to visit the park from beyond the grave. Let's hope it's that, and that they're not seeking revenge on Disney and the park goers. Hey, maybe they're Walt Disney's friends and they just meet up with him every year for a cup of tea. Who knows? In our 2nd spot today, we have the Woman in White. The Woman in White is the name given to a lady often wearing a 19th century white gown. She apparently haunts Main Street at Disneyland. But we for sure know that this lady is a nice ghost. Legend goes that on a number of occasions she has guided lost children to the Disneyland Baby Care Center, where they were then reunited with their parents. Reunited and it feels so good. Sorry. So if you do happen to run into this ghost, don't worry. Apparently she's nice. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the heart attack. Did you know that the Haunted Mansion ride used to be so scary that it gave someone a heart attack? According to a number of Disney workers, they have heard this creepy legend surrounding the Haunted Mansion ride. Legend goes that before the ride was open to the public, they had some people go on the ride and test it out. Well, one woman was so scared that she had a heart attack and died while on the ride. As a result, the ride went under construction for several more years before finally opening in 1969. So apart from the fake ghosts that the ride has, there are also a number of real ghosts that haunt this ride, like this poor woman. Starting off this countdown, we have Animal Kingdom. Disney's Animal Kingdom is said to be the largest theme park in the world, covering 580 acres. There you can find an abundance of cute animals. But here's the thing. The park once got in a lot of trouble when it first opened in 1998 because they experienced a wave of animal deaths. In a short time frame, a bunch of the park animals were dropping dead. Now, Disney claimed it was only 12 animals, but in reality, it was closer to 30. This included rhinos, hippos, antelope, gazelles, and cheetah cubs. Now, you're probably wondering, how come these animals passed away? Well, mainly neglect on Disney's behalf. Other animals died after fighting each other, and others ingested toxic substances. Let's just hope that now Disney treats the animals better. Moving on to number 9, we have Thunder Mountain. In 2003, something really freaking dark happened on the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad roller coaster at Disneyland. Say that 5 times fast. Railroad roller coaster. During this ride, one of the wheels fell off and the ride crashed. As a result, it took the life of a man named Marcelo Torres, and it injured 10 other guests. And guess what? After the California Division of Occupational Safety and Health investigated this accident, they found that the mechanic and ride operators were at fault. This incident was a result of budget cuts at the park. The wheel needed fixing before, and the mechanic did cheap work on the roller coaster. And apparently, a half an hour before the incident occurred, the ride operators heard a weird noise coming from the ride, but ignored it. In the end, the Torres family sued Disney, and they won the battle. Imagine that, though. Disney trying to cut corners on their rides. Like, that doesn't make me feel safe.
They're businesses. They're human businesses. What do you expect? In the magical world, we don't do that.
Watch sky racing live anywhere.
Disgusting, if you ask me.
Disney trying to cut corners on their rides. Like, that doesn't make me feel safe at all. In our 8th spot today, we have the initiation. Believe it or not, but Disney is known to have some pretty terrifying hazing and initiation rituals for new staff members. But the initiation is not what you think. The staff are mentally and physically tortured. For starters, they go through this intense training process in which they learn all the do's and don'ts of being an employee, like learning scripts word for word without adding words or substitutes or like ums. You can't do any of that. Trust me, it's worse than you think. On top of that, they are then forced to smile all the time, and they will get in trouble if caught not smiling. And of course, during this week or so of hell, you got other employees pulling pranks, making you wish you never applied for this job in the first place. Moving on, at number 7, we have the Ghost of Epcot. As you probably have noticed by now from the other parts in this series, Disney is incredibly haunted. Like, there are hundreds of ghosts that haunt the parks. For this one, let's talk about the little girl and boy that haunt Spaceship Earth at Epcot. A number of people have seen a small girl with long blonde hair riding in one of the cars. They've also seen a boy run in front of them, only to vanish into thin air. Pretty creepy, am I right? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Mickey and Friends parking structure. In 2012, a young man's body was found at Disneyland's Mickey and Friends parking structure. At first, it was thought that he took his own life, but no one saw him jump, so they don't really know what happened. Now, here's the eerie thing. This structure has been the site for a number of deaths. In 2012, a man fell from one of the floors and passed away. And in 2010, a man purposefully jumped from the top of the structure. It's like it's cursed or something. Moving on to number 3, we have the Disney Hotel. Another place associated with Disney where a number of people have died. Sadly, most of the deaths were self-inflicted. For starters, in 1994, a 74-year-old man jumped from the 8th floor balcony to his death. In 1996, a 23-year-old man either jumped or fell to his death. It still hasn't been discovered which one it was. And in 1998, an employee jumped from the same floor as that previous man. But this employee actually survived the jump. I don't know what's up with this hotel, but countless guests have died there. It makes it seem like something sinister is going on there. Or it's cursed. In our 2nd spot today, we have the Tower of Terror. Of course, this ride is haunted. I mean, it's pretty creepy on its own. I swear, ghosts like to haunt the scary rides, like the Haunted Mansion, the Tower of Terror, you get it. Why don't they haunt the little teacup spinning ride or the Flying Dumbo ride, you know? Anyways, rumor has it among employees that they often see a ghost wandering around the Tower of Terror after hours. On a number of occasions, staff have seen this man. They call out to him, but he doesn't reply. Then he disappears right in front of their eyes. Yeah, no thank you. No. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Roger Rabbit ride. In September of 2000, a young park guest ended up falling out of Disney's Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin ride. Now, he did survive the initial accident, but was left with very serious injuries. When he fell out of the car, the ride rolled over him and folded his body in half. He was stuck under there for 10 minutes before someone came to free him. He went into cardiac arrest and was left with serious brain damage. After that incident, he never walked or talked again. He passed away several years later as a result of these injuries. Of course, Disney is to blame for this. They said medical personnel arrived on the scene way too late. Things may have been different if they got there faster. This accident caused a lot of their emergency protocols to change. Starting off this countdown, we have the snake. You have to be careful when going to Animal Kingdom. Not all the animals are safely behind cages. In 2016, a grandma and her grandson were at Animal Kingdom when a wild snake fell from a tree and bit the grandson. Now, he was fine, the snake wasn't venomous. But the grandmother went into cardiac arrest after seeing this all happen, and sadly, she passed away. Wouldn't that be a terrifying encounter? Like, you go to Disney with a relative looking for a good time, and then you end up injured and your relative dead. I feel so sorry for that family. The family, of course, sued Disney World because turns out that the snake was a local Florida serpent and somehow made it onto the resort. In our ninth spot today, we have the Big Brawl. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then why don't you smash that like button? Imagine celebrating Christmas at Disney World only to encounter a real-life Scrooge. So back in 2015, an old man was waiting for his food at a cafe in Disney World when he became tired and grumpy, and no, not like one of the 7 dwarves. He was fed up, saying it was taking too long. So, what did he do? He shoved one of the managers and started a huge fight among them all. At one point, he got tackled down. People were so scared that they fled the restaurant without even paying for their meals. So they dined and dashed at Disney. What a little rebel. In the end, the man was arrested and thrown out of Disney. Thankfully, only a few were injured in this fight. But still, imagine witnessing that fight on a time of holiday cheer. I bet he got cold in his stocking. Also, since when is Disney open on Christmas? Is that a thing that I just never knew? Let me know in the comments below. In our 8th spot today, we have the Cleanliness. So Disney parks seem very well maintained and clean, right? Like, there's no graffiti, hardly any litter on the grounds, and the rides seem to be well kept. Well, yes and no. According to a cast member, all the locations that a visitor can see are kept super clean, but the areas they don't see are disgusting. For example, apparently the inaccessible parts of the Haunted Mansion ride are gross. Like, they are dusty, filled with cobwebs, and they have a nasty stench. And no, that was not part of the attraction. And they even found asbestos there. But obviously the park guests aren't supposed to know that, so it's okay, right? No, I'm sorry, that's gross. According to the same worker, every time she came home from her shift, she stunk and had to take a shower immediately. Yikes. Coming in our 7th spot, we have Splash Mountain. Disney has strict protocols in place to keep all its guests safe. Most of the injuries that have occurred on rides have been a result of people not listening to the safety protocols, like standing up in a ride or unbuckling themselves during the rides, etc. Sadly, this happened to a man riding the Splash Mountain ride. According to a Disney employee, a former Disney World College Program cast member, there once was a man who took his life in one of the Disney hotel rooms. And Disney used its magic to cover it all up. So basically,
Which
the
was
room
another
in which
drawing.
it happened had its door and windows covered with a "Pardon our dust" renovation sign. When police arrived, they had a bunch of costume characters and cast members go to one section of the hotel for a meet and greet to distract the guests from seeing the police come into the building. Apparently, Disney constantly does this. They always divert your attention when something dramatic happens. For example, another employee said that they used fire jugglers to distract people when an animal control officer had to get a venomous snake out of the hotel's water fountain. And this guy only had 15 minutes to do it while the show was going on. Honestly, it just seems super stressful working for Disney. I swear, some Disney workers are like trained as if they're part of the FBI or something like that. In our 2nd spot, we have the Stunt gone wrong. According to a number of articles, the Hollywood Studios Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular Show was one of the most dangerous shows at Disney. Also, what a name. Hollywood Studios Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular Show. Geez, say that 10 times fast. Now, why is this? Well, a number of stunt performers have gotten badly injured in this action-packed show. Apparently, one performer fell 30 feet to the ground after his support cable broke. Another time, a different employee fell 25 to 50. Another time, a different performer fell 25 feet to the concrete. And a third fell 25 feet to the ground after a prop ladder broke. Thankfully, those performers all survived. But in 2009, one performer passed away after performing a tumbling roll. For this trick, the performer had to jump in the air, dive over another performer, and then tuck and roll onto a mat. But something went wrong, and the performer ended up landing wrong and snapping their neck. That is absolutely heartbreaking and terrifying. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Haunted Dolls. I think that the scariest ride in Disney would have to be It's a Small World. Like, take a look at those terrifying dolls. And apparently, they're haunted, okay? According to a number of Disney employees, they have seen the dolls in the ride change positions, disappear, or even move when the ride is off. Some even say that their hair appears to grow on its own, as if they're alive. In fact, every couple of months, Disney's cosmetology team goes in and cuts the doll's hair because they grow. They say it's just the humidity combined with gravity and that causes the hair to stretch. Either way, it's freaking creepy. According to one employee, they arrived for their morning shift only to find that a couple of dolls switched places during the night. Some vanished without a trace. So listen here, Annabelle, okay? Leave those damn dolls alone. Don't touch Disney.
Ooh, first kiss. What do? Kiss him with a tongue, run away from him, or kiss him, but
Starting off our list in our number 10 spot, we have Warren G. Hooper. Warren G. Hooper was a 40-year-old state senator in Michigan. In this state in the 1940s, political corruption was a huge problem, and it was quite common for politicians and legislators to accept bribes in exchange for votes. After Warren confessed to accepting a $500 bribe for his vote on a horse racing bill, he was offered immunity if he testified as a witness in front of a grand jury. On January 11th of 1945, just a few days before his testimony was scheduled, Warren was driving to his home, but never made it there. His car was found in flames shortly after on the side of the road, and the body of Warren was found in the front seat with 3 bullet holes found in his head. To make matters more suspicious, there were 2 other witnesses who were also supposed to testify in the same case, and they were both also found dead under suspicious circumstances as well. This is when a gang called the Purple Hill Gang began to come into the investigation. The Purple Hill Gang was a group that really controlled Detroit during the 1920s and 30s. There were rumors swirling that a former state treasurer named Frank McKay, who was under investigation in this grand jury case, was behind the killings of the witnesses, including Warren's. It was believed that Frank had bribed a deputy warden to temporarily release 2 of the imprisoned Purple Hill Gang leaders so that they could commit the horrible crime against Warren and then promptly return to the jail, which would give them a pretty solid alibi. 4 former members of the Purple Hill Gang did end up getting charged with conspiracy to commit murder because of the testimony of an informant that they had once approached him and asked him to take Warren's life. And while the 4 were convicted, they received quite short sentences, and one of the convictions was even later overturned. In our number 9 spot today, we have Michael Mansfield. Michael was a 19-year-old student at Lincoln College in Illinois, and he lived with another student named Russell Smrekar. Russell ended up being expelled from the school after being charged with burglary for stealing a guitar and some record albums from another dorm room. After his theft, he had given the stolen albums to Michael, and in order to avoid being charged with possession of stolen property, Michael agreed to testify against Russell. This took place in 1975, and on New Year's Eve of that year, Michael was spending the holiday at his parents' house when he told them he was headed out to see a friend. Unfortunately, Michael was never seen again after this night, and of course, because of the loss of the witness, the charges were dropped against Russell. Although extremely suspicious, this alone, of course, didn't mean that Russell had anything to do with Michael's disappearance, but just you wait. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ruth Martin. Okay, you thought I was gonna leave you hanging with the last one, but I promise you that I am not. Shortly after Michael's disappearance that we just talked about, that same creep Russell was charged with stealing 3 steaks that totaled to $4 from a local grocery store. The witnesses to this crime were Jay Fry, who was a produce manager at the store, as well as a woman named Ruth Martin, who had seen Russell toss the steaks into his car after stealing them. Both Jay and Ruth were called to testify as witnesses, but on June 2nd, 1976, Ruth went missing and her abandoned car was later found with blood inside. 3 months after this, Russell broke into Jay's home and shot both Jay and his wife, which took both of their lives. He was caught for this crime and was sentenced to 300 years in prison. Okay, so what does this have to do with Michael and Ruth?
Well, no one knew what happened to either of them until 10 years ago in 2011. Russell became terminally ill in jail and decided that then was the time for him to make some deathbed confessions, and he confessed to taking both of their lives as well. Unfortunately, neither of the bodies have ever been found, but it is absolutely insane to think that 4 innocent lives were taken over some stolen records and $4 worth of stakes. In our number 7 spot today, we have David Kelly. David was a nuclear scientist and weapons expert. In 2003, he had an off-the-record conversation with a BBC journalist in which he explained that the dossier that the UK government had created in reference to Iraq's nuclear weapons capabilities was actually falsified. Despite this being off the record, the conversation was reported widely and ended up coming back onto David. Just a few weeks after this, David went for a walk in the woods near his home, but he never returned. Of course, search parties were sent out to look for him after his family was worried when he didn't return, and he was later found dead, but the circumstances were quite mysterious. Just a small trigger warning before heading into this next part, as it was ruled that he did take his own life. It is said that David had taken coproximol, which is a painkiller, and that he had also severed his ulnar artery in his left wrist with a pruning knife that he had since he was young. This is obviously horrific, but not necessarily the most suspicious thing, but here's where things get weird. Firstly, those who spoke to David that day explained that he seemed to be tired, but was in good spirits, and despite being in a bit of trouble, he received a lot of support for his honesty. The weirdest thing is that neither the blister pack for the painkillers or the knife had his fingerprints on them. There were no fingerprints on them, which would suggest that the items had been wiped clean, which certainly would be very bizarre. Despite it officially being declared personally inflicted, many people believe that foul play was much more likely. In our number 6 spot today, we have Moreau de Moreau. Moreau was an Italian investigator. Before his disappearance, he apparently was convinced that he had the story of a lifetime, and he had even told his co-workers that he had a story that was going to shake Italy. There are 3 main speculations and theories about what this story might have been and what could have happened to him. One theory is that the story could have been related to the death of a man named Enrico, who was the president of Italy's state-owned oil and gas conglomerate, Eni. The next was that his story could have been about finding a drug trafficking network between Sicily and the United States. And the final theory is that his disappearance might have been related to a failed right-wing coup that took place in the 70s. Despite extensive searches, he has never been found, and in fact, 2 of the main detectives who started the case both had their lives taken by the mafia. It is believed that he was the victim of what is called a lupara bianca, which is a journalistic term for when the mafia takes the life of someone in such a way that their body will never be found. Whatever story he was working on, we'll likely never know, and it's such a tragedy that his job he was so passionate about is what most likely led to his disappearance. In our number 5 spot today, we have Henry Baltimore Jr. In 1973, Henry was a 21-year-old honors student at the University of Michigan who had a very promising future ahead of him. In March of that year, Henry was unfortunately attacked inside of his apartment. 2 men broke in and tied him to the bed before stealing both money and material items. Henry was reluctant to report this incident to the police, but did end up doing so. After this, a suspect named Roy Davis was arrested and charged with armed robbery, and Henry was scheduled to testify at his hearing, but never showed up. 2 days after the hearing, Henry did resurface and asked the prosecutors to drop the charges because he was really frightened, but they refused and Henry was rescheduled to testify. 2 days before this rescheduled hearing, Henry ended up disappearing very suspiciously. Originally, people believed that he may have gone into hiding considering how vocal he was about being frightened, but that belief quickly went away and people began to suspect something a lot more sinister was at play. Henry's family especially knew something was wrong because there was no way.
Let's pause it. Let's go into Minecraft. Let's go play Minecraft. You know what I fucking mean. Let's go play Minecraft, cunt. Go upstairs, grab my controller, then play Minecraft. Controller, PlayStation controller. PlayStation 6 controller. Yeah, buddy. Turn on PlayStation 6. Go into Minecraft. Survival server. Connect the controller. First. Press play.
He would disappear without telling at least
Let's
one of
play.
them. The latter, he would have at least told one member of his family. His case remains open almost 50 years later, and who knows if...
Hell yeah.
VS responsibly message from Sportsbet. Now, every racing season, VS levels go through
Okay,
the roof.
grab.
Instant experts, silly omen bets at 50 to 1. Yeah, the horse has a
Grab this. Put this, put this.
Through the VS and use the Sportsbet app.
Here.
Same race multi. Combine multiple runners in the one race. And oh yes, look at those.
almost 50 years later, and who
Yeah.
knows? If someone out there who's watching this video knows something about this case, please call in and give any and all information over to the authorities. The remaining family members of Henry's deserve to know what happened to him. In our number 4 spot today, we have Lena Chapman. If you're a fan of the show Unsolved Mysteries, this might be one you've already heard of. Lena and her 5 sisters were constantly moved around growing up depending on who their mother, Sandy, was seeing and where the new boyfriend or husband lived. Shortly before becoming a teenager, Lena and her family moved onto a farm owned by their 3rd stepfather, Gary. Gary apparently was actually quite a good stepfather and was quite kind to the girls, but after a few years, Sandy began to have an affair with a local 21-year-old, as well as writing bad checks on Gary's bank account. When Gary learned of this, he of course talked to a lawyer about a divorce, and shortly after this, Gary disappeared. Flash forward years later when Lena is 17, after keeping a horrible secret for all of those years and being filled with guilt, she comes forward to Gary's brother to tell him that she knows what happened to Gary. Lena explains that her mother Sandy had actually taken his life, burned his body, and made Lena help clean up the scene and all of the evidence, and then they drove down a country road and threw his bones out of the window. Unknowingly to Lena, Gary's brother Albert was actually recording this whole confession, which he of course hands over to the police. Now that the police are confronting Lena and her mother Sandy about this confession, since Lena is 17 and Sandy is still her legal guardian, Sandy convinces Lena to walk back her confession, and since it was recorded without her knowledge, it isn't admissible evidence. A few more years go by and Lena doesn't speak of the crime again and ends up getting a job, having a baby, and she lives with her boyfriend. And then right before turning 21 years old, which would make her of legal age to testify against her mother in court, she just disappears. Everyone in the family, especially her sisters, are convinced this disappearance has everything to do with her mother Sandy and was done to keep her quiet. While this mystery is still unsolved, it's extremely likely we all already know what happened to Lena, but we just need the evidence to prove it. In our number 3 spot today, we have Oliver Munson. In January of 1983, a teacher from Baltimore named Oliver Munson purchased a used vehicle. Just a couple months later, Oliver was surprised to find out that the vehicle he purchased was actually stolen, and that the man who he purchased it from, named Dennis Watson, was actually the leader of an auto theft ring. Oliver, of course, had no idea about this dark history and agreed to testify against Dennis in court. Flash forward to February of 1984, just 3 days before Oliver is meant to testify against Dennis. Oliver leaves his home for work in the morning but never shows up at the school and ends up never being seen again. 3 days after he disappeared, his car was found 2 blocks away from his home with a flat tire, and shortly after this discovery, a stolen vehicle was discovered that had traces of blood in it, as well as a spent casing from a bullet. This vehicle also contained 2 receipts from a video store that had Oliver's name on them, which of course led authorities to believe he had been abducted and killed in order to prevent him from testifying. Unfortunately, because of lack of evidence, Dennis was never charged, and Oliver has never actually been found. This whole thing is of course so tragic, as Oliver was most likely a completely innocent party. In our number 2 spot today, we have Clinton Glenn. Okay, I'm sensing a trend here. Apparently people who abduct and take the lives of people to stop them from testifying don't usually do that just once. Previous to Oliver, who we just talked about, Dennis had another shady happening in reference to a witness testifying against him. In 1973, a 29-year-old man named Clinton Glenn was scheduled to testify against Dennis at an armed robbery trial. The day before this testimony, Clinton was unfortunately found burned to death in a car that belonged to none other than Dennis. Dennis did end up getting indicted for this crime after another witness came forward, and we were so close to seeing some real justice, but the case ended up being dropped dropped after this other witness died of a suspicious overdose. At some point, you'd think all of this would end up getting Dennis charged and convicted with all 3 witnesses' deaths, but of course this is all circumstantial evidence, and it would be terrible to have seen him be acquitted of these crimes due to there not being enough evidence to pin him at the scene. To end off these horrible stories on an extremely creepy note, Dennis was convicted of auto theft and received a 10-year sentence, but after being paroled in 1989, he kind of just fell off the map, and his whereabouts have been unclear since then. In our number 1 spot today, we have Karen Silkwood. Karen Silkwood is well known for the worst reasons. She was an American chemical technician and a labor union activist who was very vocal and often raised concerns about the corporate practices that related to the health and safety of those working in a nuclear facility. You would think this is something that all of those working in the field would be concerned about, but apparently not. She worked a job making plutonium pellets and was the first woman on the union's negotiating team, and after she testified to the Atomic Energy Commission about the things she was concerned about, it was discovered that she had plutonium contamination on both herself and in her home. Plutonium isn't an issue outside of the body, but can easily be ingested or inhaled, which is when it creates a major problem for humans. Karen was driving to meet with a New York Times journalist and an official of her union's national office after deciding to go public with some of her findings, and the people who saw her right before she left for this meeting saw her with a binder full of documentation of her findings. During her trip in her car there, Karen ended up driving off the road and striking a culvert, and this accident took her life. Here's where things get suspicious, though. That binder I just mentioned was never found. It was said that Karen had fallen asleep at the wheel, and almost twice the recommended dosage of methaqualone was found in her system, but there were clear skid marks on the road, which suggested Karen was trying to get the car back straight on the road, and despite the accident being entirely at the front of the car, there was damage to the back of the car that friends and family say wasn't there before, and paint chips were found, which would suggest a car had hit her from behind. To make this whole thing even more suspicious, apparently Karen was receiving threats before her passing. There have, of course, been claims of foul play and claims that she was run off the road by another vehicle, but unfortunately, with little evidence, these claims have never been able to be proven for sure. But what is for sure is that whatever really happened to Karen, it seems like a simple accident doesn't cover the full truth.
Coming in at number 10, we have Sean Flynn. Even though it seemed that war is just non-stop carnage without any rulebook to slow things down, I mean, it might be like that. I've never been there, and like most things in the world, when you're actually part of it, it's mostly very different. And that's not an invitation to take me to war. I never want to go. But what I'm talking about is things like don't kill civilians. They got nothing to do with the conflict. Don't use certain weapons that are considered to be inhumane. And journalists are allowed to work in the area without having to worry about being attacked by the other side. Well, the thing is, coming at number 9, we have Enrique Martinez. Back in 2020 on Memorial Day, Enrique Martinez would go missing. His family put out a missing persons claim for him, and for a significant period of time, there was nothing found. It would seem that he might have ran away because his family said that he didn't have any enemies and described him as a hippie. Seems like an interesting combination of hippie and soldier, but he just wanted to live a fun life with his family after serving his time in the military. Eventually, there would be a discovery made that would help the family know what happened to their son, more in the sense it would let them have some closure. His head was found in a pier after it washed ashore. This shocked the community where he lived. The problem was that the rest of him was never found, so it was hard to find out what actually happened to him. There was no security footage of what happened to him either, so it's unknown who could have done this to him. It's suspected to be a homicide since his head was removed from the body. Next on the list, we have James Van Fleet's troops. Van Fleet was a lifelong military man. He fought in 3 separate wars. Just to have the Constitution to go through that much carnage would be incredible. He was sent over during World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. During the Korean War, he was leading a troop of men into action, and then something went horribly wrong. Even though Van Fleet was a skilled soldier who had seen action many times before, for some reason a large percentage of his troops went missing. It's suspected that they might have walked into an ambush, or that some of the men deserted the situation to try and find refuge somewhere they could have been safer. The whole thing is still shrouded in mystery. Coming in at number 7, we have the Fort Hood Soldiers. For this, we need to head over to Fort Hood, Texas. Now,
if I can teach myself a new language while juggling fire, so can you. Well, not the fire part. Don't try this at home.
Fort Hood Soldiers. For this, we need to head over to Fort Hood, Texas. Now, even though I would never want to go to war, I find the whole experience fascinating. There is a massive psychological effect of seeing warfare. There are a few cases where people have been able to walk away from the whole experience without it affecting them very much, but for other people it seems like it sticks with them for a very long time, and then those ongoing effects might stick with your platoon. In Fort Hood, Texas, there has been a series of missing soldiers that people cannot explain. There seems to be something going on over there that is causing